Now, one of the more interesting things to happen earlier today is that the American Chamber of Commerce in Kenya has sent out a note to its members highlighting what they perceive to be the effects of the election of Donald Trump as the 47th president of the United States of America. Of course, the effects expected to be far-reaching and percolating right across the globe, but many people ask, what does this mean for me? So that's the question that we are starting off with, Ken. So major upset in the US. Of course, many people expecting it to go differently, but I mean, Trump is now the president-elect, and congratulations to him. What impact do you think this has?
Many thanks, Wakaba. This was the most significant event of 2024. I think people are surprised at how quickly it happened and how decisive it was. And obviously right now it's looking at Trump's team. Who will he put in that cabinet? Will people like Elon Musk feature in the cabinet? And I think people are looking at the potential of tariffs, what that will happen. So I think there's an expectation from an energy perspective of low energy prices. I think he's very keen on that. But I think the European counterparts will be wary of tariffs, particularly German automotive companies such as Volkswagen. Their shares actually slipped for the last couple of days. So it tells you that the Europeans would be hit hard. I think from an African perspective, we'll be focused on AGOA and that US-Kenya trade deal that had been there for some time, then sort of took a trade banner. So much to happen, but I think the team has to be put together before we can have a good indication.
For a lot of people who struggle with the impact that politics has on the economy, and they fail to sort of understand the interconnectedness and the importance of one to the other, one simple line sort of crystallized it. The fact that for Elon Musk, his net worth climbed by about $250 billion. Day one and day two of this election, once it became clear who the winner was going to be. Why do you think this is the case? Why is it important? Where is this nexus that is bringing this about?
Well, obviously, politics is about priorities. And the Democrats had their own priorities. The Republicans focused a lot on tax cuts, reviving the domestic economy. I think the economy played a big role in determining where the election would go. So obviously, the political candidate was able to articulate a path where Americans have jobs. Fuel is not as expensive as it was during the previous term. So I think that was a message that really lingered. And if you look at the last rally that Trump had in Grand Rapids in Michigan, he asked a fundamental question: are you better off than you were before? 4 years ago. And there was a resounding no. And I think sometimes politics has that simplicity. At the end of the day, it's that simplicity of, do people feel they're better off or not? And I think people spoke the way they did.
Yes, so for Elon Musk in particular, his grouse was simple. He said that the Democratic government in place had stifled innovation by creating so much regulatory material that he had to keep dealing with, that was slowing him down, as he said, and that he was betting that Trump would actually put away some of that thing, everything from crypto to the sort of rocketry stuff he's been doing lately, going to space, those sorts of things. I mean, it makes perfect business sense, because if this is going away, then you can expect that his businesses will do well.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same Elon who in 2022 had told Trump maybe it's time to call it quits and take a sunset ride. But of course, being an entrepreneur tends to prefer environments where there's less regulation. There's more of a wild west. I think entrepreneurs thrive.
And the big tax cuts that they had enjoyed.
Absolutely. And I think the Republicans provided that. I think Democrats were more on regulation. So it's natural to see more of the entrepreneurs sort of backing Trump, particularly in the tax cuts. But although the Democrats did have a $50,000 tax deductible loan for startups, but I think there was a feeling that that tax cut from 21% to 15% is really what would get money circulating into the economy.
Yes, especially when you figure out that for a lot of the billionaires who people were saying would get these cuts, a lot of them put this money into real estate, put it into labor-intensive manufacturing and that sort of thing. And that is where lots of Latinos and blacks find their jobs. So this was a direct infusion.
It was. And actually, if you look at the demographics that really pivoted towards Trump, it was a Latino vote.
Yes.
Much more. The Latino men and Latino women are really pivoted. If you look at the 2020 versus 2024 results. So you're absolutely right. Sectors that affect those particular demographics, real estate, and Trump's headquarters was in Florida, which is a big Latino community, big real estate. So you're absolutely right that there was that possibility that tax cuts would make some of these investments possible, which in turn create jobs for many of these minority communities.
Yeah, so the big question then for many Kenyans, many East Africans, many Africans, many in the global south, lots of fast programs like the Global Fund. We have PEPFAR financing HIV and TB drugs. We have USAID having recently expanded extensively across the region. We have programs run by larger American foundations and that sort of thing. Do we expect this to start going away? Should we expect a massive policy switch? What do you read in this space? What will happen, especially in view of what happened in the first Trump presidency?
Let's take it case by case. I think if you look at AGOA, in the first Trump administration, he had said he would not extend it beyond 2025. I think Trump would have favored a more of a bilateral relationship, one-on-one with countries. So he might actually pick up on that, where he looks for bilateral relationships with critical countries in Africa. If you look at PEPFAR,
do you think Kenya would benefit?
It was already there. It was it was actually being tipped to be the first U.S. trade deal with an African country before the Biden administration came in. So possibly that could come up on the table. If you look at PEPFAR was not very popular with the Republicans. At some point there were concerns that it was promoting abortion in parts of Africa, and it kind of ran into headwinds with the Republicans. So whether that will sort of be able to be maintained, that will be quite different. But also you have a lot of countries like South Africa that export items to the US that are not part of AGOA. Like South Africa exports minerals and metals that are not part of the AGOA framework. So for them, it really doesn't matter. But obviously the tariffs will definitely be able to impact them.
So on the flip side, he's talked about a lot of tariffs. And the perception is that with the so-called tax cuts, he stands on making the country great again and getting money back into Americans' pockets, that we might start to see inflation kick up again, forcing the Fed to start to try to tackle it, and that this will then push up interest rates and then, of course, affect everyone else negatively, because the recent planning off that we've seen give relief to countries like Kenya might start to reverse, and we'll see a strengthening dollar and all the attendant issues therein. Where do you read this going, especially in view of the fact that we've only just had, 1 or 2, 3 months of easing?
Well, I think that came up clearly yesterday during the Fed's press conference, in which a journalist asked that particular question, and Jay Powell said they don't forecast anything until it becomes into a law. And they've made a lot of promises. Not all of them will become laws. Some of them might be, and even the tariffs might not be as extensive. There's one thing of playing to the gallery politically, and there's also one that is quite moderate. That said, Trump has made some significant statements. He said the president needs to be involved in interest rate decisions. They need to sit on the Federal Open Market Committee. And a journalist, really asked Jay Powell if he is likely to resign.
Get fired.
Exactly. And he gave a very curt no.
He said no twice. I think that was really specific. Let's talk about tariffs and the impacts, especially on one hand, there's tariffs. On the other hand, there's sanctions in certain places. All this creates, so to say, market distortions. And sometimes places like Kenya, rest of Africa, bear the brunt of this. For example, if they do get into a trade war again with China, although that, of course, is far out there. But if it does happen and the tariffs do kick in and we see a slowdown in that country because then demand has fallen off a cliff, the clear benefit is that for the rest of the world, commodity prices go down, everything from oil to metals, like bei ya chuma in Nairobi bwana, and that sort of thing. So there could be clear benefits.
On the contrary, China has said they've been preparing for this for the last 1.5 years.
Yes.
And as we speak, they're preparing a domestic stimulus package that is supposed to boost the domestic demand, so much so that if foreign demand is not there through tariffs, they have a very big domestic demand. So it's something they've thought through for the last 18 months. So don't be surprised if by the flick of a switch, they really start focusing on the domestic demand and making sure they have people can afford Chinese products. So it might not be as dramatic as we expect it to be.
One of the things that has been said quietly is that China had actually figured out how to get around the tariffs by going through Mexico, assembling, refining, putting labels on things in Mexico and doing the final sewing and those sorts of things, and then crossing the border and saying made in Mexico. So quite something to think about. What about in the instances like in a few days, people are going to Baku, COP29?
Yes.
It was expected that we would continue to talk about the sale of the carbon credits and those sorts of things. And here now is the prospect that the US, despite being the major gorilla in the room, might have to contend with the fact that they might not even be present in the next one because the president decided to pull them out.
Yeah, it will be very similar to the COP event in Paris, really, when the US really was a non-player. You're absolutely right. It's not something that's very popular within the Republican Party.
Yes.
I think the focus there is on things such as fracking that can reduce the cost of energy, get industries, especially in the Rust Belt area, back to production and creating jobs. That seems to be the priority. So I would not be surprised if through a tweet, we're back to the tweets, that some dramatic...
Truth social. But then, of course, the fact that drill would mean lower prices for the rest of the world. So maybe a boon for Kenyans and others, that we might actually start to forecast a glut in the oil market, and that's consistently lower than $60 oil. I mean, because for us, it's been... You have gotten used to oil at the 200 shilling level. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, that will definitely be a good news for energy importers, oil importers. It might be a bad news for the OPEC cartel. They might actually cut production, just try to manage that cost. But you're right, for countries such as Kenya, where we really want to boost our manufacturing, the cost of energy has been very prohibitive. It could definitely be good news.
What about all the people who've been betting on commodity prices, especially in the things that will go into electric cars and that sort of thing? Plenty of hype, especially in the more developed African economies, in Europe, in Asia and other places. Do we expect that there might be some sort of shift in focus, even with Elon Musk being one of the major players in this space?
I don't think there'll be a shift. I think what the tariffs might end up doing is, I think what Trump really wants to achieve is to ask these companies to start relocating to build in the United States. Not to stop selling to products to Americans, but to build it in the United States and to create American jobs. So companies like Volkswagen, for example, if you look at two key brands such as Audi and Porsche, they do not have factories in America. So I think the key thing is for them to start building factories in America to create those jobs. But definitely, I think the push will still be there. I think there'll still be a big push from a savings perspective. I don't see electric vehicles going anywhere.
But then something you've raised there really piquing my interest, because we have the brands that you've mentioned, but the biggest global brand today being something many people have never heard of, BYD, out of China, and making inroads in many European and the American market. So, of course, an uphill task. But I want to bring you to, in conclusion, to the sort of concessional speech that he made, because when he declared that he thinks he had won, the speech was radically different from the Trump that people are used to. The boisterous, pushing people around. This was more conciliatory. I'll work for everybody. I'll be the uniting factor. Literally speaking to almost everybody and moving back from the far right where he'd been. Do you think this is because Trump essentially doesn't have to get elected again, or are we starting to see a mellowing of the spirit?
I think that's a good point, but I think it also points to a more mature Trump. He's getting a second bite at the cherry. And back in 2016, it almost came as a surprise.
Having burnt his fingers.
Absolutely. Yes. So I expect to see somebody from day one hitting the ground running. Already is working on his executive orders. So I think there'll be a bit of boldness.
Yes.
But obviously, I think with the challenges of the first term, I think they are well aware. I think he already has a chief of staff who's very focused. And I think it'll be a much smoother running than probably in the first time when it all came as a surprise, really. Yeah.
So then, for me, and I think we can start to close with this, if it were up to Ken to advise Kenya, to advise the president on what to focus on so as to make the most of this coming administration, where do you think our focus should be?
I think getting that US-Kenya trade deal back on track, I think it would be very promising, particularly with agricultural products. That's always a hard, bilaterally, that's always the hardest part, because Kenya has excellent horticulture industry.
Yes.
Like if you look at our avocado segment, China is really taking so much of it. So I think to build an opportunity for farmers to export into the US. I think that
the distance, despite the...
Absolutely, and despite the huge regulations, the Food and Drug Administration is one of the toughest agencies to
But the market will be worth it.
Absolutely. I mean, you're dealing with the largest economy in the world. The purchasing power is there. And I think...
What particular areas do we...
I think if we can focus on things like agriculture and tourism.
Yes. Or if we to talk about crops, are we looking at nuts? Are we looking at macadamia? Are we looking at...
I think avocado would do extremely well. Yes. Already there's a big demand in the US for avocado, whether it's
and
for...
tourism, like you were saying.
And tourism, absolutely. But also with things such as what we do well in terms of textiles. Already the SEZs have been doing that well. Can we scale that up?
Okay.
I think that would be quite good in what can happen in the apparel space.
Okay. Indeed, thank you very much for your time, Ken. Always a pleasure having you, and of course the valuable insights there. And for the viewer, of course, with the fact that we expect to see much more of the detail coming out of the coming new administration, what the areas of focus will be, and of course for how you as a Kenyan can get your business to benefit from that huge market, as Ken indicated. Well, it has been a blast. My name is Peter Wakaba. Thank you for taking the time. Up next, the news in Swahili with Sam Amani. We do make that date in a few minutes. But from us, it is Kwaheri ya kuonana, and see you Monday, same time. Asante sana.